And we're live. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Itzik, and hello everyone watching.
Hi, Roby. So it's been a while since Gabby and I were doing this a while back, revealing the solutions of CTF. So we're back at it, and this time it's Robbie and I. So it's really exciting. Both of us, kind of like are in the weeds of those challenges and doing those quarterly and also bi-weekly and so forth. So it's really fun for us to do together. Um, we're back to where we stopped. So we stopped pretty early, and we haven't done it, but now we're planning to do it more frequently. So we'll catch up eventually. We're now at number 29, even though number 70 is going to be released on Thursday. So we're way back.
We have
But
some catching up to do, Itzik. We have
yes,
some
yeah,
catching up to do.
absolutely some catching up to do. So um, I'm sharing my screen just to share with you. This is challenge number 29. And let's just dive straight to it, straight in it. So, challenge 29. What are we requested to do? The name is login as a user, which already tells you what we are planning to do. And then there's, this URL. If you take it, go to it. It's just a login page, right? So it's a login page, simple login page, user password, right? And then what are we requested to do? We're requested to log in as a valid user. So this is a system, it's a closed system. There's no sign up. I can't create myself a user. I need to log in as someone. I don't know who that's gonna be, but anyone who's a valid user is great for us for the challenge, right? It's a one pepper, supposed to be not that complicated. And Robbie, what do you think looking at the code here? There's get user here, there's the endpoint, sorry, there's login, and then there's the endpoint, the main endpoint of this, which is login. What do you think is the vulnerability here?
Yeah, so like for some, it may be very obvious from looking at this code, but how I approach any of these challenges is I start with what is being imported, because that kind of tells you already what kind of systems are interacted with here. And in this case, we immediately see MySQL is being imported. So we know there is going to be some database of some sorts. And then I start by going through the routes that are exposed. And here, there is one endpoint here at the bottom, and we can see immediately that this login function is being called with our body user body password. And
Mhm.
then we see that login function immediately calls get user with that username and password, which is direct user input. So immediately this get user function is very suspicious to me, and it does some SQL stuff. And in this case, I see a query written in the code, and a query written in the code that can only mean one thing. If it's not done properly, it might be an SQL injection. And in this case, we see that this is a string, but in this string, some user input is being interpolated using these dollar sign curly braces. So user input is being put directly into a SQL statement, and that's telltale signs of SQL injection. So that's kind of immediately brings me to where I need to be to start exploiting this.
Amazing. So we have the vulnerability. It's SQL injection likely, right? That's what we think it
Yep.
is. And then how would you go about trying to solve something like this? Let's look at the query. So let's say we decided it's an SQL injection. How would you approach using it to achieve the goal here?
Yeah, so in this case, we just need to log in into any user, um, which means that your goal here should be to have this query return some rows. Like any row for any username would work. In this case, it's also important that it returns one row. That's something
Yeah.
we see in the login function below. If rows.length is not equal to one, then it's not going to successfully log in. So we
Mhm.
need to return one row. Uh, we obviously don't know the password of any username, so we cannot enter a valid password, but we can enter a password that starts with a quote, which is then going to end, for example, that string that's already there. And then you can start working in an SQL language and do anything. You can say, or 1 equals 1, which
Mhm.
is then going to return true for every user. And that's great, that works, but you also always need to make sure that your query in the end is a fully valid query. What I usually do when I solve these challenges is I take the full query into Notepad and I start putting my payload inside there and start looking, is this going to be a valid full query? Because usually there's some bits at the end like in this case, you see that there's the limit one, the quote limit one at the end. That can kind of mess you up without you knowing it. So your full payload may be correct, but SQL will still throw an error because that's there. So if we bring that into a payload, yeah, it looks exactly like that. So we use a quote, and we don't need to enter anything in the username field. That's perfectly fine being empty. We inject in the password field here. Of course, this is also a terrible practice in code. You would never want your password being in plain text in the database, but that's a whole separate issue. In this case, it is like that. And by starting with that quote, we kind of escape that string that we have. So we escape the password string, and now we are writing actual SQL queries. So or 1 equals 1. That's going to return true for every row. So then we need to limit 1, so we only return 1 row. And then at the end, we need to use dash dash to kind of comment out, because dash dash is a comment in MySQL, to comment out everything that's left in the query. And usually we always add a space and then another dash, or space and another character. And we do that because in MySQL, just a dash dash is not actually a comment. It's dash dash followed by a white space. So if you're just going to do dash dash, then that quote from the real query is going to follow it immediately, and it's not going to work. So usually we do dash dash space. And in this case, just dash dash space would work. But a lot of systems, they also will trim white space from passwords or from usernames or from any user input, and that would then remove your space again. So that's why we add another character behind there to make sure it cannot be trimmed. And that's how we get to our payloads. That hopefully works.
Yeah, let's try it. So boom, yes. So the system thinks we logged in. So we're going to skip that. We're not going to add ourselves, but yes, congratulations. We were able to solve it.
Awesome.
So this actually works. So I guess this was really good overview. And what I like about it, again, sometimes we're putting out there the simplest form of vulnerabilities for developers or any professionals who are actually trying to teach themselves or get educated about specific vulnerabilities. SQL injection has been around for 20 years or more, and it's not gone yet, right? I mean, Robbie is out there testing systems and seeing it all the time. Am I wrong?
Yes, sadly, I'm still seeing it. And I say sadly because, in my opinion, SQL injections are an issue that should have been eradicated by now, because it's such a simple code pattern to spot, right? We as humans can spot it really easily. There's a query with text coming into it. SaaS tools are even better at spotting SQL injections because it's such a simple code pattern. So this shouldn't exist anymore, but sadly, every month, and I do about 4 pen tests in a month, every month I see another SQL injection in another real application out there in the wild. And SQL injections, like in this case, you can log into any account, but you could even use this specific query to retrieve any data from the entire database. The impact is usually very, very big. You have a really high confidentiality impact. In some cases with an SQL injection, you can even write new data to the database. Or in MS SQL cases, you can sometimes even get remote code execution from it. So the impact is so big, this vulnerability just needs to be eradicated, which is why it's important that developers are educated on how to spot this bad code pattern.
So that's why we're also including the write-up. The write-up actually takes you through, the goal of the exercise, description of the code. We went through that, so we don't need to do that right now, but you can read it. And then what it says, it actually gives you, first of all, why is it so important? And Robbie mentioned that, like there's a so what, it could be really, really dangerous, SQL injections. But the main important part is the educational component here where, there's the takeaways, right? And so what are the takeaways? How do I prevent that? And again, that's the most important thing, because one of the best practices is, there are ways to run queries, a safe way to run queries, right, Robbie?
Yeah, that's true. So there are 3 main ways of kind of running queries in a safe way. You have prepared statement and parameterized queries, which is where you kind of, instead of creating a query string yourself, you have some code build it safely and handle all of your sanitization of all these strings for you. So that's one way of doing it. You also have stored procedures, a kind of an older way of working, not as versatile. But then, in my opinion, the best way of working with the database in your code is through a ORM. An ORM, it stands for object relational mapping, if I'm correct. An object relational mapping, it sounds difficult, but what it is you use a library that implements all of the database interactions so that you don't need to have any SQL in code. So in your code, you'll be able to write users dot where username equals, and it will be written in actual code and not as an SQL string inside of your code. And that's kind of where the power comes from, because these libraries, these ORMs, they have years of expertise in preventing SQL injections. So they have all of the knowledge, they implement it securely, and then you use it. And it's not possible to have an SQL injection anymore. If you use parameterized queries, it is still possible for you to accidentally not use the proper way of injecting the user input into the query. So you can still make mistakes. But you want to use an ORM because then you don't have SQL code in your normal application code anymore. And that's kind of the safest way of preventing SQL injections entirely.
Absolutely. And then I think, the second takeaway here is is a lot more generic, right? It's true for a lot of different vulnerabilities. And it is, the user input sanitization, right? So what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, user input sanitization, it's very important, but people usually only think that get parameters and post parameters are user input. But you need to think of user input as something much, much broader. Kind of any data coming from another system going into a new system is user input. This can be data coming from your database. Data coming from your database and then being passed through to another system. You cannot for sure say that data was properly sanitized in your code. So for any time where you have some data flowing from one system, like from code to SQL, or from XML to your code, or from any type of system to another system, you need to then once again do your sanitization on all of the inputs going in that second system. And that's very, very important.
Absolutely. And lastly, I think, again, this is even one level higher, where we're looking at the OWASP Top 10, which is an organization. OWASP is an organization that actually updates and reviews vulnerability ongoing and updates their definitions of the top 10. They actually have a few lists of top 10 right now. And it's really important for us to learn that. Why is it so important, Robbie, you think?
So OWASP, they make a list of the 10 the 10 vulnerabilities that are most seen in the past couple of years. And it's important because those are the vulnerabilities that attackers are using. So those are probably the first vulnerabilities you need to defend against. So that's why it's really important to know them, to be able to defend against them. And usually, when you first hear about a vulnerability like an SSRF, you have no idea what it means. So you need to do some training to have some idea of what it is. What is an SSRF? What is an SQL injection? So, and then you also need to learn, how can I make sure that my code, my applications are secured against this? And this top 10 is a great start for you. If you want to get into security, start with the top 10. There's a lot of documentation, a lot of content around it. You can learn really quickly. It's the best place to kind of start in writing secure code.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think with that, I would just say about the OWASP 10, I mean, it's a lot more than just 10 vulnerabilities. Those are 10 categories, right? Like injection is one category. There are multiple types of injection. SQL injection is one. You just looked at it. And there's a lot of other types of injections. And they become a little, every category becomes a little more nuanced and a little more like spread all over multiple spaces. And in last November 2025, the OWASP organization released their top 10 refreshed version. So get yourself educated a little bit. Take a look at the vulnerabilities that they see as the most, or the categories that they see as most important. And I think it's very important for you guys, for anyone, to actually be familiar with those, because this is based on research. So That's great. So, Robbie, this was really fun going through this with you. We're going to do this again, hopefully every week or two, and we're going to try to catch up with the many challenges that we've created over the last couple of years. And I hope you learned something new. And see you next time.
Yeah, totally, 100%. I hope that everyone learned something new. Go try out the challenge as well. Try it out. And if this was too easy for you, then we have many more challenges that you can also try out. And if this was already quite difficult for you, don't worry. We have a lot of learning resources, many write-ups. So read them all and enjoy learning. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.